As a professional involved in electricity delivery, the T&D World Podcast and tdworld.com is your definitive source for breaking news, industry updates, and more. We've got you covered from transmission to distribution and everything that affects the power grid. And now, on to today's episode.
Welcome to the T&D World Live Podcast today. I'm Nikki Chandler. I'm editorial director, and our topic today is really the most important topic in utility operations, and that's safety. We had Chad Schimpf, operations safety supervisor at Ameren, Illinois, with us today, and he has a great story to tell. And we were talking a little bit before. I really appreciate his message, and we're kind of doing all we can to help him get that message out to the industry. In fact, he's going to be speaking at our event in September in Orlando, T&D World Live. So we're excited about that. And, we're just thankful that he's giving us some time today. So Chad, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so we know that you spent 20 years as a lineman, and you could talk to us a little bit about that. And now you have been operations safety supervisor for the past 5 years. Am I right on that? And then can you kind of briefly walk us through that journey and what drew you into getting into safety leadership?
Yeah, so I was a coal miner for 10 years there in Southern Illinois, right out of school. And a friend came up to me and asked me, hey, do you want to be a lineman? And at the time I was like, I really didn't know what that was, So he explained it to me, and I was fortunate enough to get the call to go to climbing school. I worked out of the IBW Local 702 for several years before I got hired on as a lineman at Ameren. Went through that journey there, worked my way up, to being a foreman and a one-man truck. And then at that point, that is when I had my incident. And then I went back to being on the crew as part of my punishment for what happened. And then I had the opportunity to come over to the safety department after several years.
Okay, yeah, and we want to hear about that that incident, and of course, being in leadership now, and we could talk about this a little bit later. You are the chairman of the safety conference for the Lineman's Rodeo too, right?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, and that's we work with that event as well.
Yeah. So part of what I did after my incident pretty quickly was went around the company and spoke about what happened and why it shouldn't have happened. And then that just kind of branched out to speaking other places. I've been all over the United States talking about it, and trying to promote safety and doing the right thing. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to speak at the International Lineman's Rodeo, and became good friends with Kim and some others there at the conference, and evolved into now I'm not only the chairman, but I'm also the MC as well. So it's a great opportunity.
Okay, yeah. So we'll see you out there this fall. That's actually takes place. The convention takes place where I live.
Oh.
And then of course Bonner Springs, the fairgrounds up there is just a little bit north. So that's an exciting event for us every year. So I'm glad that you're involved in that. Let's talk about the incident and what kind of got you to where you are now. You have been very open about it, and it's so 7,200 volt electrical contact. Can you share what happened and what stands out most when you think back on that?
Yeah, so Ameren gave me everything that day to be successful, and I chose not to use some of those tools, and it resulted in my incident. Most of our policies and procedures through OSHA, through companies, they're I won't say written in blood, but they're written because of something that happened. And that's what happened. Now good things have came out of this. I know it's hard to believe, but way more positives have came out of this incident than negatives.
So do you mind walking us through the incident a little bit, or?
No, absolutely. So I was what was called a one-man truck. We had a power outage on a Sunday. Little hesitant to take the call because I'm very involved in my church. But I went ahead, that's our job as linemen, is to, restore people's power. I always say if my grandma was out of power, I would hope that somebody would take the call, right?
Yeah.
So I took a call Sunday morning, got there, roughly around noon. Figured out that we had some three-phase underground, and that we had a one phase was de-energized. Um, get there, open up what is a live front switch cabinet. Um, realize we have a fuse blown. Call for extra help, to get the one-man trucks there. Um, we decided to leave the switch cabinet energized. A friend of ours, in our line room, actually owned the grocery store that this was fed off of, and so we decided that we wanted to leave it energized.
Mm-hmm.
We should have de-energized it, but we did not. So that being said, without pictures and some other things, to really explain it, when we got done, the crews did a great job, repairing the cable and everything. And I went down to the switch cabinet by myself and went to re-energize it. And upon doing that, I slipped and fell into the hot switch cabinet. Yeah, 7,200 volts went in my left hand and exited out both of my big toes. I've got some pretty powerful slides, when I do this at T&D World to share with everybody, but
Okay.
it was pretty terrible incident.
So as you mentioned, yeah, I mean, it's just terrible at the time, but being able to learn from that and then being able to get the message out is kind of the good that comes out of that.
It is,
Yeah.
and the company asked me early on, hey, do you mind speaking about it? I'm glad they
Mm-hmm.
did, because
Yeah.
for me, getting back to work, I mean, this happened. I was literally in the burn unit for 24 hours, went back to work the next day. Now, I didn't go back into the field, because I had my wounds and stuff, obviously. But got back in the room with the guys, you know what I mean, and just tried to have some normalcy in my life, because there was a lot of stuff going on in my head. I didn't know, what was going to work out in the future, my health, my
Mm-hmm.
job, all kinds of things. So, the company asked me to speak about it, and I did, and it just evolved, into something bigger and better. And very fortunate that's how it played out, because I am able to share, my story and my testimony, and if
Mm-hmm.
I'm able to help one person make a good decision that they may not have made, then it's all worth it.
Yeah, and I mean, save a life, because that's wow. It's amazing that
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
you're here to talk about it.
Well,
So
yeah, I mean, you think 7,200 volts, there's not very many people in our industry that's had that one walked
yeah,
away from it.
yeah,
Two has their arm or leg or their foot, or whatever
hmm
body part that was affected.
yeah,
I'm very blessed that I don't have, as far as I know, any effects of that physically.
hmm
Mentally was a challenge for a long time,
yeah.
but I feel like I've gotten over that as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to the mental part of it too. You think, oh, you survived and that's great, but yeah, there's a lot that comes from that. And even with line workers in general, in the environment that they work in, we actually just did some coverage of mental health and how important that is for line workers because they aren't always ones to kind of seek that help if they need it.
Yeah, and it was tough, because
Hmm
linemen are very prideful. Anybody
Yeah,
who knows linemen are very prideful.
yeah,
And it hurt my pride. I hurt my family. I hurt my friends. I let down my coworkers. I let down my company. So there's a lot that goes on that people don't think about because you never really think it's going to happen to you, right?
yeah,
And
right.
then it does, and you don't understand all the stuff that comes with it. You know,
hmm
I didn't know my long-term health if I was going to live. I didn't know if I was going to live till the next day.
Yeah,
I had to call my wife and tell her that I didn't follow some rules that I should have followed. Then you got to talk to your kids and tell them, hey, make the right decision every day, do the right things, right? But hey, guess what? I took some shortcuts that should have ended my life and it didn't. And then, I'm very thankful that I didn't lose my job. The company
hmm
probably could have easily got rid of me. But I was a good employee um, up to that point. Made some bad decisions that day, and probably made some bad decisions and had gotten away with them for a while. And that's the thing we I think we all do. We all take chances, right? Sometimes and we don't have to, and that's part of the big thing about my conversation is not taking those chances.
Yeah, so let's get into that a little bit. We know that you've said in presentations and your message before that that's how we've always done it, is this mindset that, we all have it. Not all of us are dealing with that life and death situation, but it's a mindset that have said that needs to go. So, where does that mentality show up most in utility work, and why is it so dangerous?
Well, the trade is evolving daily. I mean, we
Yeah.
all talk about continuous improvement, right? Well, all these utilities, and the co-op, we're all evolving. The equipment in the field is evolving. Vipers, trip savers. I mean, everything's getting smart, right? The tools that we're able to use are evolving. Our trucks are evolving. So our training and our education and the way we do things has to evolve as well. We have to close that mindset of, yeah, I know there's a new way to do it, but this is the way we've always done it, and line work's about 100 different ways of doing things, right? But we have to figure out what is the right way to do it, and we have to know that it's okay to do it that way.
So, let's get back to a little bit on you said you'd mentioned that your company gave you those, they gave you the tools, they gave you the safety equipment, and I know Ameren's great about safety, and so many utilities are. But you said choices still played a role. So, I mean, that kind of evolves from that, oh, that's how we've always done it mindset. And then the changes, but you need to adapt to those changes because they're there for a reason. That's not always an easy thing to say. You're so honest. So, what can you tell others in this field? What can they take away from that honesty? Like, what would be the message to them on being able to face those things?
Right. Well, number one, I mean, we have to understand we're not all perfect, right? Sometimes we maybe need to make another phone call to get help to help us, out in the field,
Hmm.
if we don't know exactly what we're doing. Um, companies, I think, need to start at the top down. I think leadership needs to, you know, let their workforce know that it is okay to do the right thing, and then to back
Yeah.
it up, to not let it just be lip service, invest in training and education and cultures.
Hmm.
Cultures is a big
Culture.
thing
Yeah.
here. I mean, yeah, we have to invest in those cultures. And, when you have safety meetings and you bring people in, the leaders have to be at these meetings and they have to say, hey, it's okay to do the right thing. You know what I mean? If you don't know
Yeah.
what that is, call somebody else, get some more help, try to figure out what that right thing is so that we can all go home the way, we went to work that day, because one wrong decision in this trade, it's not very forgiving.
Yeah, I mean, and that's so true. Like you say, not just paying lip service to it, because at the corporate level, and you'll be presenting to a lot of different people at T&D World Live, a lot of different various roles with utilities, but they can talk about safety all day long, but depending on who your foreman is or who your leader is, what is happening there in those meetings, like you said, and
Yeah.
just even day
Yeah.
to day. Yeah.
Well, and it has to be boots on the ground too. When you have your
Hmm.
tailboard and
Hmm.
you have your job brief discussion, um, the leaders, they need to make sure that they have a good job brief paper to go by. We talk so much
Okay.
about, in the trade, that the conversation of the job brief is what makes you safe, not the actual job brief itself. But we've been
Mm.
involved with EEI, with the HECA and icons, and trying to teach, safety recognition and or hazard or safety, uh, high energy assessments, hazard recognition.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that the tailboard, the conversation is good, but the paper is also there for us to follow and help us as well and trigger things, right? And that has to come from the companies. They have to make sure that those conversations are being had and they're good conversations.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about a little bit about your recovery. You said you were at work the next day, but the actual recovery was a lot longer than just that, be able to get back to work as far as, mentally, physically, everything like that. What can you maybe pinpoint a time in that recovery or a moment when your perspective kind of really changed and even your role in it? Because you said you didn't know what was going to happen. You didn't know about your career. You didn't know anything about, when and how did that kind of start shifting? Was it a moment? Was it over time? What?
Yeah. So, whenever this happened, I got suspended for 30 days, with no pay. And thankfully that I had that, right? I mean, I could have, I could have gotten terminated. But I had a lot of time to reflect on things. When I came back, I got bumped back from a one-man truck to being on the crew. Um, and, had a lot of gut check moments, you know what I mean? And it took me a minute. Not that I went back to work and, I was, doing all kinds of crazy stuff, but I was working and things were, it took a while. I mean, it took me a while to get back in with the guys and, and grab hot energized primary, again, and, trust my tools and equipment and,
Yeah.
make sure I was doing everything correct. And so, it took a minute, but I just had a gut check one day. I'm like, I want to do something bigger. I want to try to really take my story because I've been, I had been going around talking about it. Understand that I should not be here today, and I'm a religious person, so there's a lot more that
Mhm.
goes to this to me than just, luck but
Your faith, your faith is very
absolutely, yes,
instrumental
ma'am,
in
and
that. Yeah.
yes, and so, I lean hard into my faith, and
Mhm.
and what I should be doing this bigger, than
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
And so I had a lady that I was friends with that was in the safety department, and we've been talking and stuff because I had done my speak at some events that she was at, and we created a good relationship, and about 3 years went by, and I was able to come into the safety side of Ameren and really try to make a difference, and I'm glad because the company could have said, you know this guy broke rules. We're just gonna get rid of him, and you know what I mean, and he can figure it out. We don't want that type of person here. Very fortunate that they brought me in and said, "Hey, no, I want you here. I want you talking about what you did, why you did it, and help us figure out how we can make a difference." You know what I mean? And so I thought that was huge.
Yeah.
It allowed me to actually try to help change cultures and make things better.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you were led that way. Doors were opened, and so that's awesome. Let's get it back to a little bit about the culture. And I know that one of your key messages over time has been about having those difficult conversations. It's not necessarily just, okay, making sure our meetings are going well and um, we're prioritizing that safety, but the difficult conversations are hard anywhere. So what makes those conversations so hard in this industry? And, how can crews or even one individual get more comfortable speaking up?
Yeah, I mean, pride has a lot to do with that.
Mm.
My wife gigs me all the time about, my pride and arrogancy or whatever it is. You know what I mean? About alignment and we're
Yeah.
all proud of what we do.
And
Being
that's
alignment.
important. I mean, I think
Yeah,
I mean that you do an important job.
yeah, and not everybody can
So
do it, and you got to be a
yeah,
little bit off, to
yeah.
be a lineman.
So,
But
so yeah, I get
well,
the pride and there's a
yeah,
reason for it,
yeah,
but
yeah. But and I'm not saying that Ameren had a bad culture.
yeah, I get
But we
that.
can always all be better, right? I mean, we
Hmm.
probably always all take chances, you know, and that's when those conversations are tough. You got a 30-year lineman next to you working, who's probably forgot more about line work than you remember, and you're like, hey, hold on, time out. Let's do that different.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I think in our territory, incidents, happen and they do help us to gut check us a little bit. But, I would hate to be that person that, watched something happen, didn't say anything, and then something happened. Now, that wasn't necessarily the case the day that I got injured. I should have taken somebody with me to the switch cabinet. I'm not saying that cultures were, bad there and things were,
Yeah.
but there were some things that I could have done, that we could have done that would have been better that day. And we try to make it. We try at Ameren, try hard to let everybody know it's okay to speak up. You know what I mean? Stop work authority. We talk about that all the time, and it's easy to say that, but I think people have to understand coming from the top down and working with your coworkers, and maybe sometimes just taking a time out and having a conversation about the job if you don't understand exactly what's going on.
Yeah, so that was kind of my next question. Like, what would be your advice for being in that moment? And maybe the taking the time out is one of the things you can do because you still want to be respectful, but you're right, kind of thinking about that consequence and watching something, you don't want to watch something happen. So is that kind of what you would say for the advice for like, I'm in this moment, what do I do? Don't be
Yeah, and
scared. Yeah.
it's easy for me because I've been there. It happened.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
thing I
Yeah.
never
Yeah.
thought would happen happened. I wish I would have brought somebody down with me, that day. Maybe they would have told me to do something different or, whatever. But you know, it, it's I think it's getting better in the trade. I think it really is. I
Mhm.
think the conversations are getting better. I think, the younger linemen coming in are understanding that they have a voice too, and it's all about delivery, right? Every conversation,
Right. Right.
everything we have is about delivery, right? So it's about in your safety culture, it's teaching those people coming in how to approach that conversation the right way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's big, and I don't think we talk about that enough in the trade because any conversation we have in life is based off of how you deliver it, right? It's why, I try to
Yeah.
tell my kids any important conversation you have, try to make a phone call because text can be taken so many different ways. You know what I mean? I get that with my wife all the time. I have to tell her, hey, I'm sorry, I made you mad. I can see how that happened. I didn't mean to. This is what I meant.
Yeah.
But those conversations on the job site, if somebody is questioning something, it has to be delivered the right way as well.
Yeah, and on kind of on the other side, you need to be able to be a person that is able to listen and be respectful of the person that's bringing that to you. So,
Yes, absolutely.
yeah, all over the place. So, yeah, and I know that some utilities, I know I've talked to Exelon and things like that, and some people there as far as they actually do. That's part of kind of their training too, is that communicating part of it, and so that's really important because that's not
Yeah.
necessarily something you get just coming out of high school or and going to a lineman college or doing some climbing school. Maybe there is some of that somewhere. I don't know. Amy Fishbach, she knows a lot more about it than I do, but yeah, that's important.
Yeah, it's how to deliver those conversations, how to
Yeah,
approach
how
each
to
other. I mean, that's
yeah.
big. That's real big. And I don't think we talk about that enough.
Yeah, I mean in her whole life really. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, so being chairman of the safety conference for the International Lineman Rodeo, uh can you speak to any trends or gaps that you're seeing across the industry when it comes to safety culture? You did mention that, some of the younger linemen are seem to be a little bit more willing to be open
Yeah.
about things like that.
So yeah, I mean, we're the trends I'm seeing at the rodeo are we're moving the needle on everyday recordables. You know what I mean? I think safety is really becoming big, and companies aren't just talking about it, they're actually, trying to back it up. But we're not moving the needle on our high energy stuff. And I think that's why EEI and HECA, is big right now. Because if you look across the trade in the United States, those high energy trends are staying the same. I mean, for 10, 15,
Hmm.
20 years, we're not moving the needle there. And I think they're trying. I think things are coming out. I mean, I think we're getting there. I think companies are doing a good job of getting rid of everyday recordables and incidents, but the stuff that you're going to lose an arm or a foot or your life, maybe, I don't think I don't think for some reason we're not moving the needle very well on that yet. And
Hmm.
that's something I'm hoping, with my conversations and things I can try to do, that it will help.
Yeah, I mean, and it especially with International Linemen's Rodeo, I mean, we have a lot of linemen that come to that every year, but it's still only a part of the industry. So
And those people are coming from all over the world,
they
and
are, yeah,
that's
they
what's
are.
awesome about that. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, and there's so much history there, and tradition, and it's such an awesome family event. You go
Yes.
out to the rodeo, and your women are pump, their kids are in the stroller, and they got their lineman stuff. I mean, it's
Yeah,
awesome. I mean,
it
it
is.
really is. And Kim and her group have really trusted me to help shape the safety conference, and do some different things. And it's getting bigger every year. We had last year we had people standing up against the wall. That's how awesome that conference was. Yeah. So, and I'm not
Yeah.
saying I did it. I'm just saying it's
Yeah.
evolving, just like everything else, and it is getting better and bigger. And it's really awesome to be a part of, and I'm so glad that I'm able to do it.
It really is. My kids grew up going to Lineman Rodeo. I would take them every year too to watch the Lineman, and they've had, they have the kids events out there. So, yeah, it's such a neat event. I would recommend anybody that can get out to it that in Kansas City in the fall, get out there. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
My stepson is actually a lineman for apprentice for Hammer, and I'm hoping, that next year he'll be able to go out there and compete. So that'd be awesome.
Oh yeah, that would be. We'll have to make sure we get him on the podcast. All right,
Yeah,
the
there you
Line
go.
Life one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you are going to be speaking on this topic at T&D World Live, as we mentioned, which is in Orlando in September. And like I said, that audience is not just linemen. There may be some there, but it's really various roles at utilities. So, there are managers, executives. What can they learn from your session? Like, what's going to be your message to them at that event?
Well, it's about, the conversations and doing things the right way. And again, that has to come from the top down, and sometimes that may be investing some money, right?
Yeah,
Maybe we need better harnesses, maybe we need better SRLs. Maybe we need to upgrade some of our hand tools, stuff that guys are asking for. Because one thing about linemen, they're not afraid to ask for equipment. They see
no,
things
right.
on TikTok or wherever, and they're not afraid to ask for it. Listen to
Yeah.
what they're asking for. Help reduce the day-to-day stuff, which I think they're doing. But it may cost you a little bit to really start investing in your safety program, right? Invest in training, because to me, training is knowledge. The more we know, the smarter we are. I know we have young linemen coming in from climbing school or wherever, or college, but what about the guy who's been out there for 10, 15 years? We need to keep sure we're refreshing those guys, the guys that you're actually depending on to run your crews, and be your general foremans and that kind of stuff. We need to make sure as companies that we're educating those people as well, so that we're keeping them knowledgeable, which they're keeping everybody safe as well.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be great. Looking forward to having you out there, and we'll be out there too. So, um, really appreciate that. Anything else you want to add kind of before we wrap up here?
No, the main thing, my whole presentation is about culture and influence, right? We all look to somebody for guidance. I don't care where you're at in your life, in your job, we look to people for guidance, and we all have influence on somebody. Don't be afraid to have a good, positive influence on someone, because if not, they may be learning bad traits, from somebody else who's not going to speak up, right? And then the other thing is culture. Don't be afraid to change culture. If you don't start today at your work of business, whatever you're doing, that culture is never going to change. We've got to start sometime. Why not start now?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much, Chad. I appreciate your time today. Thank you for this message of safety that you're getting out. And I look forward to seeing you at T&D World Live, and then at the Lineman's Rodeo. So,
Yes, ma'am.
yeah. All right. Thanks.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity. I greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for your service.
Thanks again for listening to today's podcast, produced by Endeavor Business Media, a division of Endeavor B2B. To hear the latest information for power delivery professionals and industry best practices, subscribe to T&D World Podcast and visit our website, tdworld.com, where you can find insightful articles and sign up for our free daily newsletter.